I want to suck your blood.
What? I'm not an animal. Monsters. Creatures of the night. The strange and unusual. Throughout history, cultures have been cooking up accounts of monsters to terrify and entrance the mind. These stories serve as cautionary tales, give us insight into things we can't explain or don't yet understand, and in many ways say more about the cultures that created them than just a scary story. But what I'm curious about is the food these monsters eat, how their diet reflects where they began and what it might represent to the people and places it originated from. So, with Halloween upon us, I feel it's the perfect time to explore these mysteries. Now join me on this devilish dive into how monsters eat. Let's dig in. Every culture throughout history has come up with monsters, from ancient legends like Geronimo and Baba Yaga to more modern examples like Freddy Krueger and Michael Myers. Monsters are a physical embodiment of our fears. The shadow moving in the night, the creature that blurs the line between human and beast, or human beings being twisted into something unnatural. Like all mythology, monsters were a way to help make sense of the world, and as our understanding of the human mind grew, we began to see the monster in ourselves. Serial killers are considered to be real-life monsters. Like the monsters of antiquity, they prey upon humans operating in the shadows and evoke a sense of fear within us. But oftentimes they outwardly seem just like anyone else. It's unnerving to think of these so-called monsters doing everyday mundane tasks like going grocery shopping, or folding their laundry, or sitting down to a meal. As a chef, the topic of last meals comes up a lot. If I were to say for my last meal I want a bucket of fried chicken, some fried shrimp, french fries, and a pound of strawberries, you might not find that to be too unusual of a request. But if I were to say that was the last meal of John Wayne Gacy, a serial killer responsible for the death of 33 boys and young men, well, you might look at my choice a little differently. And then there's the ultimate culinary taboo, cannibalism, the act of eating another person.
That's a rather tender subject.
Some people, like serial killer Jeffrey Dahmer, gain a twisted sense of power and control out of doing this. They see their victims as objects rather than as people. We tend to label characters like these as monsters. However, some have resorted to cannibalism as a last resort in survival situations, being left with tremendous feelings of guilt and shame. And yet still, others have participated in cannibalism simply out of scientific curiosity, like journalist William Seabrook, who encountered cannibals while in West Africa. In an attempt to ascertain the true flavor of human meat for himself, Seabrook struck a deal where he procured and prepared samples of human meat for his own consumption. He describes the flavor at great length in his book Jungle Ways. While this is an interesting piece of trivia, even bringing up such ponderings raises an eyebrow or two. A morbid curiosity about what humans might taste like is enough to make you rethink everything about a person, no matter how civilized they might appear. On the outside, you could be a brilliant and cultured psychiatrist who enjoys fine wine and classical music, but pair that wine with a taste for human flesh, and you have the makings of a monster. Of course, there are more macabre creatures that have a taste for human flesh. Monsters typically take on a distorted human form, but none in such a visceral way as the zombie. Zombies are a walking embodiment of our fear of death, but they also represent more cultural fears, the fear of the other or mass hysteria, a loss of free will, or even drug and alcohol addiction. All of these fears are encapsulated in what they consume: us. Our modern idea of the zombie comes courtesy of Hollywood and can easily be attributed to George A. Romero's The Night of the Living Dead. The film set the standard for how Hollywood would present the creature for years to come. Slow-moving, unintelligent, and of course, hungry for human meat. But these zombies immediately had metaphorical importance. Being released in 1968, the film was a reflection of its time in the way the zombies represented a herd mentality. Rioting, protest, and civil rights are all featured as subtext throughout the film. So right off the bat, the zombies feeding on us held a deeper meaning than pure horror. The zombies' diet as a reflection of our society is brought to the forefront in the follow-up Dawn of the Dead, released in 1978. The movie takes place inside a shopping mall, a place where survivors and zombies alike are drawn because it represents pure consumption. The mall had everything you could need: food, clothes, entertainment. It was where the living could walk mindlessly for hours and consume, just like the dead chasing them. Here, the zombies' hunger mirrors our own. No matter how much we consume, it's never enough. A zombie's never-ending hunger can be seen as a metaphor for another, more real horror: drug addiction. Zombies are truly insatiable. They exist only to consume. In this way, they mirror cases of extreme drug addiction where the person is no longer who they once were. Consumption has become their singular motivation, and this drive could be replaced with any addiction: sex, alcohol, even knowledge. Which brings us back to the brain. It's become common to depict zombies wanting to consume brains. But zombies never specifically crave brains in any of Romero's Of the Dead movies. So where does this trope come from? The first film to feature this image came from The Return of the Living Dead in 1985, and despite a similar sounding title, this is not a Romero production. It is also the first film to depict zombies running and speaking. It's interesting that the first film to depict a sort of higher level of intelligence for zombies is also the first film to have them actively seeking out the source of human intelligence with the intent of devouring it. In the film, the zombies crave brains because it lessens their pain of being dead, potentially because the zombies are robbed of their brains or free will. It's also been postulated that zombies crave brains as a means to increase serotonin, which is created in the central nervous system, a part of which is the brain. Serotonin is a happy hormone along with others like dopamine. These hormones make us feel good, and interestingly, are released when we watch scary movies. Modern films may have helped craft the zombie mythos, but to me, the original film Zombie comes courtesy of Frankenstein. Frankenstein is the story of a man who,
Yes, I know, made me from dead.
as the story goes, the monster is made up of pieces of dead bodies and reanimated. Sounds like a zombie to me. Frankenstein's first screen appearance comes courtesy of Thomas Edison in 1910, but arguably the most famous incarnation of the monster and the one that has influenced most of its depictions comes courtesy of Universal Studios and Boris Karloff. This interpretation of the creature has always been a sympathetic one. In the film, The Bride of Frankenstein, the creature goes on a journey of trying to find acceptance. At the beginning of the film, he is on the run from an angry mob. Alone and injured, he first comes across a group of travelers and attempts to get something to eat, but as usual, they react with terror at his mere appearance. This scene is immediately followed by the famous scene where the monster meets and is befriended by the blind hermit, who takes him in and offers him food and shelter. The monster goes on to learn to speak from the hermit, uttering his first line in the series.
Bread.
Sharing a meal together is a very human activity, and it is through this that we see for the first time the monster being treated as a human. Here, the monster has a normal life until he is again discovered and driven out by those afraid of his monstrous appearance. As he runs away again, he encounters arguably the true villain of the film, the mad and eccentric Dr. Pretorius. The two meet while the doctor is having a picnic lunch inside a crypt. The macabre dinner setting is used quite effectively to show how unusual Pretorius is. The monster, associating food with friendship, once more is offered to share a meal. Only this time, Pretorius is attempting to seduce the monster into doing his bidding, much as he attempted to seduce Dr. Frankenstein earlier by offering him gin. It is in both scenes that we learn of the plan to create a new female monster, the titular bride.
You make man like me?
No. Woman. Friend for you.
Pretorius uses food and drink to provide a level of normalcy before revealing his abnormal intentions. So both the monster and the bride's growth is explored and paralleled by scenes where characters share food and drink. The Universal monster movies have been some of the most influential and innovative movies of all time, and they solidified many of the trappings of our modern Halloween. Mad doctors with buzzing electrical equipment and hunchback assistants, looming gothic settings filled with cobwebs, a wolf howling somewhere in the distance. And while Frankenstein, which premiered in 1931, may have given us one of the first film zombies, earlier that same year, Universal immortalized another creature of the night and gave us the definitive template for what we think of when we hear the word vampire.
I am Dracula.
The film cleverly uses food to show us that something is unusual about the Count, when he offers Renfield food and drink, but refuses to dine with him.
Aren't you drinking? I never drink. Why?
The pause Dracula uses is a clever bit of dark humor, as we all know that vampires are characterized by what they do drink: blood. And while it's not as explicit as today's vampire fare, Dracula does indeed drink blood throughout the picture. But how did the legend of the vampire come to include drinking blood in the first place? Contrary to popular belief, Bram Stoker did not base his story off the historical Vlad Dracula, more commonly known as Vlad the Impaler, due to his habit of skewering enemies on giant wooden spikes. Instead, Stoker came across the legend of Vlad the Impaler while he was already outlining Dracula, and merely adopted certain aspects of the legend. Vlad the Impaler's bloodlust may have gone beyond his preferred method for torturing victims. Experts have postulated that he may have suffered from porphyria, a disease which causes the sufferer to be sensitive to sunlight and may make them crave human blood. It can also drive those inflicted to go insane over time. Bram Stoker may have popularized the vampire to modern audiences, but the roots of the vampire, as a human who has risen from the dead, comes from Slavic mythology. Other cultures view vampires as not being human at all, and having entirely supernatural origins. Almost every culture has come up with some creature that drinks human blood. And of course, blood has always symbolized human life, and the shedding or taking of blood represents death. Vampires are often very sexual creatures.
When you're a vampire, you become very sexy.
And the drinking of blood has been used as a stand-in for sex or for lustful desires. In Victorian fiction, vampires are often juxtaposed with characters who behave properly and morally. Here, they represent danger and excitement. They are the temptation away from societal norms toward a more risque lifestyle. As vampirism is passed on by biting, it can be seen as a plague. Since this plague is spread by a person with intention, it can be seen as a corrupting thought or a new idea, challenging the status quo. It's no surprise then that subjugated groups or outcasts have embraced the vampire as a symbol of empowerment. In this way, vampires have become quite sympathetic, and their diet reflects this. A vampire refusing to drink blood is often used to draw a distinction between an evil vampire and a heroic one. In Interview with the Vampire, Louis refuses to drink human blood for quite some time, opting instead to survive on small animals like rats in order to go on living. Meanwhile, Lestat kills with no remorse. If anything, he revels in it. The way these two characters feed directly relates to who they are and how they feel about their dark fate. Then, of course, there's Twilight. Yeah, we gotta talk about Twilight. The vampires of Twilight call themselves vegetarians, as they refuse to feed on humans, opting instead to hunt animals. This sets them apart from other vampires, making it okay to fall for the sexy, sparkly creature of the sometimes night. After all, he's a good monster. A brooding, tortured monster, with angst. The drinking of human blood is framed as a frenzied loss of control. It's the dark part of ourselves that we battle against, and suppress. It's never just about drinking blood. Of course, vampires aren't just famous for what they eat, they're equally famous for what they don't eat. Garlic. For centuries, garlic has been seen as having healing properties, and to be sure, it's full of things like vitamin C, fiber, calcium, and iron. It can also reduce blood pressure and lower the risk of heart disease. So naturally, many cultures have also viewed it as a way to ward off evil spirits. Another common cooking ingredient thought to have protective powers is salt, and drawing a circle of salt might protect you from one of the most magical of monsters, the witch. When we picture a witch, many things come to mind. An old woman with warts and a hook nose, perhaps green skin, They fly on a broomstick and are sometimes accompanied by a black cat. But witches weren't always such dark figures. Female energy and power has become intrinsically linked with the witch. Ancient cultures worshipped powerful female deities, and practitioners of holy rituals were often women who provided essential services for the community. They cleansed impurities, assisted in birth, took away sorcery, and treated the sick. These ancient priestesses may have been the precursor to the witch. When the Hebrews settled in the land of Canaan, they brought with them a new religion, which banned the practice of witchcraft. These wise women were viewed as pagans, and the perception of the witch began to change, from sacred healer into something more nefarious. The Tree of Knowledge and the Serpent, both of which were important symbols of these early religions, were transformed into something dangerous and forbidden. The cauldron, a once mundane cooking implement, became the place where the witch would brew her potions. The witch became a temptress with evil intentions, and stories of the witch began to reflect this. For example, Circe from the Odyssey enchants sailors with her honey wine. But more commonly, witches were believed to prey upon far more innocent victims.
I smell children. Marvelous.
Of course, real modern-day witches don't eat children. In fact, their diet is pretty boring. They eat just like everyone else. Yet the idea of a witch devouring children is one that is baked into our modern monster mythology. As it was seen at the time, women were the caretakers of children, so the corruption of this role became a figure who hunted children. Drawn to the innocence and purity of children, they serve as cautionary tales. If children were to misbehave or venture off alone, a witch might steal them and gobble them up. Telling stories about witches brought the whole thing full circle, and they became allegorical warnings of real dangers that haunted the world. A popular example of a witch tempting children with sweets is the White Witch from the Chronicles of Narnia. Here, the witch tempts a young boy with Turkish delight, a rather underwhelming Christmas-time treat. But for the author of the Narnia books, C.S. Lewis, the dish represented a luxurious and extravagant treat that was hard to come by thanks to rationing during World War II. And while the witch doesn't eat children, the act of seducing children away from what is good and moral is ever present. And thanks to the heavy Christian themes of the Narnia series, the association between the witch and the devil is made even more clear. Witches like these are often cast as antagonists in fairy tales, like with the story of Hansel and Gretel. In it, the witch makes her house out of cakes and sweets in order to lure the hungry children in. It's only once the children arrive that her true intentions are revealed. She feeds them constantly to fatten them up before eating them. However, the children manage to trick her and escape. Fairy tales feature their own vast history of food as symbolism, like the story of the gingerbread man, the tale of an old woman unable to have children of her own who creates a gingerbread man that promptly springs out of the oven and runs away. He manages to evade many pursuers until he is eventually outsmarted and devoured by a clever fox. The story could be seen as a metaphor for parenthood, and a warning for children who want to venture away from home too early. Then there's the story of Jack and the Beanstalk, where the giant threatens to grind Jack's bones to make his bread, which some historians believe may have actually been done, though not by giants. During the 1590 siege of Paris, some accounts claim that human bones were exhumed and ground up in order to make bread. This did not go very well, as it turns out that human bones that have been left to time don't have much nutritional value. Then there's the story of Little Red Riding Hood, who is hunted by the Big Bad Wolf, an obvious warning to be cautious of strangers. Of course, not all fairy tale creatures are evil, no matter how monstrous they may appear. The opening of Shrek shows him going about his daily routine, though in a slightly twisted way. Things like bathing in mud or eating eyeballs are stereotypical monster activities, a sort of shorthand to showcase his otherness. And although Shrek loves his monster self, he's not a monster on the inside, and he uses food to demonstrate this.
Layers! Onions have layers. Ogres have layers. Onions have layers? You get it. We both have layers.
I think the choice to use onions as a metaphor is important. Onions can be off-putting in both flavor and odor, and not everybody likes onions. Donkey goes so far as to point out other foods with layers that are more standardly appealing.
Cake! Everybody loves cakes. Cakes have layers.
I don't care what everyone likes. Ogres are not like cakes.
And it's true. He doesn't care what everyone likes. He is who he is, monster and all. He's made peace with his lifestyle, his appearance, and himself. He may not be as universally appealing as Cake, but as the film shows, when Fiona gets to know him, she falls in love with him because of who he is, not in spite of it. After all, some people do like onions. Another subversive take on the monster movie comes with Guillermo del Toro's The Shape of Water, which was heavily influenced by the classic Universal movie The Creature from the Black Lagoon. In the film, eggs are used to show the growing bond between Eliza and the creature. She offers him eggs as a way of growing close to him. Eggs have been used throughout history as a way to represent femininity and fertility, so choosing this particular food is an effective way to demonstrate not only an emotional bond, but a sexual one as well. Hard-boiled eggs are also prepared in water, a fitting cooking method for a film so heavily dependent on the symbolism of water. Eliza begins her day with a bath while her eggs are boiling, drawing a direct comparison between her and the eggs. Storytellers have always known how symbolic food could be. What a character eats and how they choose to eat it gives us insight into who that character is, and monsters are no exception. A monster may look like an ordinary person on the outside, but this facade may mask their true evil. Just like a monster might be hideous on the outside, but gentle and loving deep down. You can't judge a book by its cover, but you can learn a little bit about a monster based on what it eats. So the next time you hear something go bump in the night, offer it a midnight snack. That should do it, and thank you very much.